Over the past 2 or 3 years, I've traveled great distances across the United States, Canada, and even to Japan in pursuit of kokanee. And I've generally had really good success in all of these locations. And part of the reason is because of the intensive amount of planning that I do for these trips. Now, today what I wanted to do was talk about 3 things that I sort of long range look at when planning a kokanee trip. So let's say you're planning a kokanee trip to a destination that you've never gone to fish for and you really want to have success. Now, the intent of this video is not to give you lots of specific details on each individual lake of some of the best kokanee destinations, but just to give you sort of a broader approach that I use that generally helps me have success on multiple lakes. So these are more generalities, not specificities. Every lake's going to have its own individual characteristics when it comes to best timing and what's the best gear to use and best locations on that individual lake. So the first thing I'm going to look at, though, is when I'm making planning a trip. Let's say I'm going to go fish a lake I've never been to in a far-off destination, and I've only got a couple days there to have success. The first thing I'm going to do is consider seasonality. Now, a lot of people like to think of the spring and early summer as the best time to target kokanee, and that's true for some lakes. But for me personally, if I know that that lake develops a thermocline, I would rather fish that lake after the thermocline has formed, because it's much easier to find fish when there is a strong defined thermocline, because the kokanee will be deeper. I will be readily able to identify the depth that thermocline is at, either using a data logger, a water temperature data logger, like my fish hawk that allows me to look at the depth every 5 feet going down. Or I can even just use my sonar. By increasing the sensitivity, a lot of times I can detect that thermocline line, and that is oftentimes where kokanee are going to hold. But there are also many reservoirs that do not form thermoclines, and those kokanee will tend to stay in the upper 20 foot of the water column. They're really incredibly difficult to detect on sonar because they will avoid the boat, and the width of the sonar cone makes it really difficult to detect the kokanee. So this is kind of how I make my decision in terms of timing on different reservoirs. Additionally, many reservoirs that don't form strong thermoclines, kokanee will still go to depth in the summertime, but they won't be as hard and fast held to one particular depth. And oftentimes those reservoirs are really heavily influenced by dams and water release. And in the springtime, when those kokanee are shallow, they'll often concentrate either near the dam, like you see at Lake Roosevelt, when they're drawing water down to lower the reservoir for incoming snowmelt. Those fish will concentrate closer to the dam. This is also true of many other reservoirs throughout the West, including Lake Chelan, Holter Reservoir in Montana, Wallowa Lake in Oregon, and so on. It's kind of nice to be able to target those fish when they concentrate in certain areas, especially when they're running shallow and you're sort of just fishing in the blind. Now, that isn't always the case. There are plenty of lakes and reservoirs where fish don't orient towards the dam, or the lakes don't have dams at all, and those fish will just concentrate in particular basins. I have a whole video that goes through how to locate kokanee, what to look for on different lakes, and I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. So yeah, there's this big timing thing. For me personally, I would much rather go and pursue kokanee on a lake when I know the kokanee are going to be deeper and easier to identify on the sonar. However, it is really fun to target fish near surface, and there are some reservoirs where you simply are just fishing in the blind, and that's where it really pays off to do a lot of digging into specificities about that particular reservoir. But again, if I'm going to fish a smaller lake that I know forms a thermocline, or a larger lake that I know forms a thermocline, I'm going to fish it in July or August when I know that thermocline is going to be formed up really strongly. The second thing I'm going to take into account is the lunar cycle, and the lunar cycle is pretty much one of the most important things I plan around besides seasonality. It's my experience that the kokanee bite after full moon nights is very poor. And there's a couple reasons for this. One is that kokanee have excellent low light vision, and they will take that opportunity to go and feed through the night. If there's clear skies and a bright full moon, they will go up and forage on all of those copepods and daphnia and other plankton that are in the lake that come up to feed at night out of the depths. And so you'll get there in the morning and the bite will be very sluggish, if existent at all. And then it will typically start to get going later mid-morning, with generally a pretty good bite going sometimes later into the evening, but not always. Those fish just might be resting and preparing to feed for that night before. And there's some reasons why you don't want to be out fishing for kokanee in the afternoon and evening hours, which I'll go into more in a sec. Additionally, and this is something that a lot of people don't think about, is there are numerous scientific publications documenting the population cycles of key prey species for kokanee like daphnia, and they actually peak during these full moons. So like these copepods and daphnia that they're feeding on, here's a cool study that was done in the 80s looking at population sizes of various species of daphnia and copepods, and you can see during those dotted lines, that's the peak of those populations. So not only are these kokanee feeding all night, the density of their prey is at its highest, so they're going to be the most satiated during these periods. Whereas I always plan to fish on the new moons when it's a dark skies all night. I know I'm going to go out in the morning. Those fish are going to be hungry. Their prey is going to be at lower abundance than it typically is on the full moon nights, and it's going to lead to higher catch rates. And the last thing that I plan around is called interference. And interference for me is it's other boats impacting my ability to fish. And this is where I'm going to circle back on that. You don't want to be going out fishing on full moon evenings, because oftentimes in midsummer, you're going to get a lot of competition and interference on the water from jet skiers, from wake boats, and it's just going to suppress that kokanee bite. Kokanee don't like all that motor noise, and they especially don't like wake boats and skidiots out there jetting around. It really can suppress the bite. It also makes the experience just a lot poorer for me. Now, there are some lakes where this isn't a problem because those lakes stay cold enough, or they just don't draw that type of crowd, and you have to take that into account. For instance, when I went to Connecticut, I didn't have to worry about that because I knew that that lake I was going on had motor restrictions, so it didn't really bother me, and we went out and had successful mornings and evenings there. But interference can be a real problem. I've been on lakes like in central Idaho where you need to get those fish in the box before 9 o'clock during the summer days, because the wake boats and skiers come out so early, and they can really suppress that bite, especially when fish are feeding relatively shallow. So there's the three things I'm planning around. Primarily, I'm planning around seasonality, and more importantly, water temperature and its effect on kokanee distribution within the water column. Secondly, I'm looking at lunar cycles. And third, I'm thinking about interference from other watercraft out there using the same body of water. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you. And just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye.